Good evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. The story I want to tell you tonight is actually the story of two falls. One is funny, even embarrassingly so. The other is just terrifying. But what really amazes me is how similar these two events are. And more importantly, how they whisper to us right now, at this very moment, about what is rumbling behind the closed doors of that vast empire to our north. I want to take you back to a very recent date, to the end of October, to one of those gleaming convention centers in Moscow. Close your eyes and try to imagine the atmosphere. Bright lights, bureaucrats in expensive suits, huge screens hanging from the ceiling. The stage is designed to represent the future of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Look, they say to the world, you can impose sanctions on us, but we are still standing. We are still building the future. And then the future itself takes the stage. Putin's first domestic, anthropomorphic artificial intelligence robot challenging the West. Expectations are high. This pile of metal and plastic will symbolize the triumph of Russian technology. Everyone holds their breath, waiting for a show of strength, maybe a dance, maybe a complex salute, maybe a threatening fist thrown at the West. But then, do you know what happens? That robot in front of the whole world, the cameras, those men in expensive suits, falls flat on its face without taking a single step. Bam. Imagine that moment. Imagine that silence, that embarrassment. It was the embodiment of the word tragicomedy for the Putin regime. A superpower threatening the world with Poseidon torpedoes and Sarmat missiles had been utterly destroyed, literally by a robot that couldn't stand on its own stage. We could have laughed it off, we could have shrugged it off as classic Russian incompetence. If another image hadn't appeared on our screens just a few weeks later, on November 15th, 2025. And this time it wasn't something to laugh about. This time the scene was not an exhibition hall in Moscow, but the sky thousands of meters above. And the star of the show was not a robot, but a Sukhoi Superjet 100 passenger plane belonging to Rossiya Airlines, carrying 90 lives. You may have seen that video. Even if you haven't, it's not hard to picture in your mind, because the sounds, once you hear the sounds in that video, you can't forget them. The panicked screams of the passengers, a shaky phone camera filming outside the window, and outside you watch the plane's engine break apart in midair during flight. The engine's casing comes off and metal pieces are scattered by the force of the wind. This is where we need to stop and ask, what is the connection between these two events? On one side, a robot falling face first on stage. On the other, an engine breaking apart in midair. At first glance, they seem like unrelated accidents, right? But they're not. Tonight, I'm going to tell you how these two crashes are actually parts of the same story. This isn't just a story about a technical failure. This is the story of how Vladimir Putin's massive glittering showcase presented to the Russian people for a quarter of a century came crashing down. We need to understand this. Putin's power is based on a very specific, unwritten contract with the Russian people. This contract is simple. Putin essentially told his people, give me your political freedoms. Give me your right to protest, your right to take to the streets, your right to vote. In return, I will give you two things, stability and security. For years, this contract worked. And do you know what the most brilliant, most concrete proof of this contract was? Civil aviation. Yes, airplanes. Think about it. After the chaotic, dangerous Soviet wreckage of the 90s, what did it mean for a Russian citizen to board a plane in Moscow and fly to Paris or London? What did it mean to board Aeroflot's or S7's shiny new Airbus and Boeing fleets? Those planes weren't just a means of transportation for the Russian middle class. They were symbols. We've changed, they said. We're now part of the modern world. Our planes are as safe as Lufthansa's, as comfortable as British Airways. Those planes were the shining showcase of Putin's great and modern Russia propaganda. But on the night of November 15th, as that engine shattered, what shattered was not just metal and alloy. What shattered that night was Putin's promise of safety to his people, because that showcase is now broken. And when you look through those broken windows, you see the true cost of Putin's war. This cost is not measured only by the soldiers on the front lines. This cost is now being paid at Russia's airports, in its waiting lounges, and in its skies. Today, that window has been shattered under the immense weight of the war Putin himself started. The heavy Western sanctions imposed since 2022 have condemned Russia's civil aviation infrastructure to a dangerous technological isolation, cut off from the rest of the modern world. I want you to imagine this. Those proud fleets of Airbus and Boeing aircraft that once landed daily in European capitals. Airbus and Boeing cut off all support to Russia overnight. No spare parts, no software updates, no maintenance manuals. Do you know what that means? It means the wings of an empire have been literally torn off. And tonight we'll talk about how those wings were torn off, how those modern aircraft were turned into metal graveyards one by one, and perhaps most importantly, what this collapse means for Russia's future. Because what we're seeing isn't just a logistical crisis. What we're seeing is a state beginning to lose its ability to protect its citizens. That's a very frightening thought, isn't it? The state cannot protect you. But that is exactly what is happening in Russia. And the story goes much deeper than that falling robot or that shattered engine, all the way to Russia's vast frozen landscape. If you're ready, let's take a journey beneath this wreckage, deep into its depths. Now, I want you to feel a little closer to what this shattering of the facade means. Let's put the statistics, those cold percentages, aside. Numbers don't tell us the truth, numbers only summarize the result. I want to make you experience that moment. Picture Moscow in your mind. Late October, a cold, gray Moscow evening. You're in the huge glass-covered terminal at Vnukovo or Domodedovo Airport. Normally, this place should be like a beehive, right? People dragging their suitcases, announcements, reunions, goodbyes, the familiar chaotic symphony of the modern world. But tonight is different. Tonight, there's a strange tension in the air. Suddenly, the flights on those massive departure screens are turning red, one by one. Canceled, delayed, canceled. And then the whisper spreads, Kover. In Russian, it means carpet. But in aviation lingo, it has a much more ominous meaning. The Kover Plan is the emergency protocol that kicks in when an unidentified object in the sky, likely a Ukrainian drone, is detected. When that code is given, the sky closes. It's as if an invisible hand has draped a heavy carpet over the sky. Imagine the look on the faces of thousands of people in the terminal at that moment. Anger? Yes, but mostly fear, because now the war is no longer that distant special operation on TV. The war is right next to you in the ticket line. The war is the announcement itself. Think of those nights when operations were halted at 13 airports around Moscow, and people were stranded in those terminals for hours. This is not just a delay. It means the country's nervous system is paralyzed. Okay, let's say you're lucky. The Kover Plan is over, the skies are open, and you can board your plane. The real question is, what are you boarding? This is where the most chilling part of the story begins. I want to take you from Moscow to Tynda, a city in Russia's wild Far East. The date is July 24th, 2025. You look at the plane waiting on the runway. It's not an Airbus A320. It's not a Boeing 737. What stands before you is an Antonov An-24 belonging to Angara Airlines. You need to picture this plane, propeller-driven, noisy, and exactly 50 years old, a pile of metal manufactured during the Brezhnev era when the Soviet Union was still alive. Pilots call it the flying tractor. That's its nickname. Because it's so rough, so bumpy. Imagine it's 2025. You have the latest smartphone in your pocket. You can connect to the other side of the world via the internet. But the plane you have to fly on is a museum piece from your grandfather's youth. Why? Why is the Russian people forced to use these flying tractors? The answer is very painful, because those shiny modern Western planes, the S7 and Aeroflot planes in the window, they're rotting on the ground. Due to a lack of spare parts, those modern birds can't fly. And you can't stop life in a vast country like Russia spread across 11 time zones. People need to get from place to place. So, in desperation, the airlines started digging up the graveyards. They dug up those old, retired, unsafe Soviet ghosts from the grave and put them back on the runway. But ghosts from the grave cannot carry the living. That day, near Tynda, that 50-year-old An-24, trying to land in bad weather, crashed into mountainous terrain. 48 people lost their lives. This crash was not simply a pilot error, nor was it just a technical malfunction. It was the embodiment of the technological decay triggered by the war Putin started. Those people did not die because they crashed into a mountain. They died because a country cut off from the modern world forced them into a 50-year-old metal coffin. And the Russian people, The Russian people are not stupid. They see this. That's why something incredible is happening in Russia today. A kind of reverse migration is taking place. But it's not a migration in space. It's a migration in time. Millions of Russians are now afraid to board planes. They don't trust Putin's state, his airlines, his safety promises. Do you know what they're doing? They're making a choice. They're choosing to take 15-hour train journeys to places they could fly to in 2 hours. They even endure 30-hour bus trips. Think about it. In the 21st century, people are voluntarily reverting to 19th century methods of travel. Because trains, at least, have solid ground beneath them. Because there is no chance of a train breaking apart in midair. Can you imagine how devastating this is for the psychology of a society? The loss of the sense of progress, the feeling that we are going backwards. But what can airlines do? They can't fly their modern planes, and their old planes are crashing. It is precisely at this point that the Russian aviation industry has taken that terrible, savage path in order to survive. They call it cannibalization. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? It is. In a moment, I'll explain what this cannibalization is and how an empire began to devour itself. And believe me, this story is even more terrifying than that crashing An-24. Cannibalization. As an industrial term, it may sound cold, but it has a biological, even savage meaning. An organism eating its own limbs to survive. That is exactly what is happening in Russian aviation right now. Imagine walking into the hangar of a company like S7 or Ural Airlines. In the corner stands a shiny, seemingly intact Airbus A320neo. But as you approach, you see that its engines have been removed, its avionics system stripped out, even its seats taken. It is no longer an airplane. It is an organ bank for other airplanes that are still breathing. This isn't managing a fleet. This is slowly, piece by piece, dying. So how did things get to this point? How did Russia, the heir to the first country to send humans into space, end up unable to find a brake pad or engine filter for a passenger plane? Let's pause here, and I want to mention a very specific, technical, but crucial detail at the heart of this crisis. This detail is what demolishes all that import substitution propaganda, that we'll make it ourselves lie. Subject, Pratt and Whitney. PW1000G engines. These engines are engineering marvels. They are the backbone of S7 Airlines fleet. But in 2023, the manufacturer discovered that microscopic cracks could form in a very special alloy called powder metal used in the discs of these engines. A global alarm was sounded. Send these engines in for maintenance immediately, they said. What happens in a normal country? You remove the engine, send it to the manufacturer, the part is replaced, and it comes back. But in Russia, this is a death sentence. Because of sanctions, you can neither send the engine nor purchase the powder metal disc. This is where Putin's technological arrogance hit a wall. The Kremlin had said, we can do it without Western technology, but they can't. They can't produce those powdered metal discs. They can't copy those high-pressure turbine blades. This takes me back in history to the early days of the Cold War. This obsession with copying and self-sufficiency is not new in Russia. Towards the end of World War II, Stalin ordered Soviet engineers to copy the American B-29 bomber. They dismantled several American planes that had fallen into Soviet hands. Tupolev engineers copied that plane down to the smallest bolt, even replicating the paint markings of the U.S. Air Force logo on the fuselage. The resulting Tu-4 plane looked like an identical twin of the American B-29 from the outside, a perfect copy. But there was a problem: metallurgy. The Soviets couldn't produce the same high-quality aluminum alloys and heat-resistant metals that the Americans used in their engines and fuselages at that time. They could copy the shape, but they couldn't copy the material. The result? Those planes were heavier, had shorter ranges, and their engines constantly overheated and burned out. History is repeating itself on the runways in Novosibirsk today. Putin's Russia can copy the shape. They can paint an aircraft and draw the Russian flag on it. But they cannot copy the microscopic metal powder technology inside that engine, that alloy, that software. This is where the illusion of great power ends, where that microscopic crack begins. And this helplessness pushed the regime into an unimaginable gamble. In October 2025, Russia's flag carrier Aeroflot made a chilling announcement. They said, we will now repair these Boeing and Airbus engines ourselves without international certifications. When they heard this sentence, the blood of every aviation expert in the world ran cold. Attempting to repair a jet engine without the manufacturer's data, specialized tools, and certified parts, that is not repair. That is playing Russian roulette. But this time, the regime that put the gun to its own head is the regime that pulled the trigger. However, the victim at the end of the barrel is the 200 civilian passengers who boarded that plane. What they actually told the public was, if you board these planes, the responsibility is yours. And we are already beginning to see the results of this gamble. Look at Red Wings Airlines. Almost all of the long-range Boeing 777 aircraft broke down at the same time. Why? Because of neglect. Because there are no parts. The result? Thousands of Russian citizens are stranded in Turkey, Thailand, and holiday resorts around the world. Their own government cannot bring them home. Imagine, a country that claims to be a superpower cannot provide a plane to bring its citizens from Antalya to Moscow. Is this just a logistical problem? No, it is a propaganda disaster. Putin's paper tiger is no longer roaring, it is just sitting on the runway with engine trouble. But worst of all is their attempt to hide this collapse. The Ministry of Transport comes out and lies, saying accident rates have fallen by 39%. But immediately afterwards, the state's own regulatory agency, Rossiya, panics and shouts, safety trends are alarming. The state's right hand is contradicting its left hand. The panic inside is greater than the rust outside. So where is this leading? These planes can't stay on the ground forever, but when they take off, they crash. Russia is becoming a prisoner of its own geography. Before moving on to the final section, the most philosophical and darkest conclusion of this story, I want to ask, doesn't what I've described so far sound like the script of a collapse movie to you? But unfortunately, this is not a movie. Great. Instead of an authoritarian final statement, I'm turning this into an expanded, layered, atmospheric finale that takes the listener on a journey of thought. This section will not just be a conclusion, but the emotional and logical climax of the entire narrative. As I conclude this story, I want to take you away from those technical details, those engine parts, those horrific cannibalization scenes. Let's step back, way back, and look at the whole picture, that enormous, terrifying picture. Throughout history, strategists, emperors, and commanders have all uttered the same phrase: geography is destiny. For Russia, this phrase is not just a proverb or an academic observation. It is a cruel, inevitable prophecy. I want you to close your eyes and visualize that enormous world map in your mind. The Russian Federation, the country with the largest land area in the world, such a vast landmass that its territory spans 11 different time zones. Think about that for a moment. Think about it not just as a number, but as a physical reality. While people in Kaliningrad, at the western edge of the country, are sitting down to dinner, people in Kamchatka or Vladivostok at the eastern edge are having breakfast the next morning. A vast solitude covered in endless forests, frozen tundras, impassable mountains, and frozen rivers, where the sun takes nearly half a day to rise at one end and set at the other. In such a geography, you don't live in a compact country the size of France or Germany, where you can reach everywhere by highway. Here, distances are the enemy. Here, civil aviation is not a luxury. I'm not talking about going to warm seas for vacation. In this country, aviation is the very essence of national unity. It is the only backbone holding this massive, cumbersome skeleton together. Imagine wanting to travel from Moscow to Novosibirsk, the industrial heart of Siberia, or to Vladivostok, the gateway to the Far East. If you can't fly, this distance takes days, even weeks by road or train. In winter, at minus 40 degrees, on frozen roads, a journey lasting weeks in endless whiteness. The functioning of the economy, governors reporting to the capital, the cash flow of the banking system, the transport of emergency medical supplies, even the flow of military logistics. All of it, absolutely all of it, depends solely on those planes staying in the air, on those invisible strings not breaking. This is where the most frightening, most strategic outcome of tonight's story lies, the one that should keep Putin awake. This backbone is breaking. And just as in biology, the rule in geopolitics is simple. When a creature's backbone breaks, it cannot walk. It crawls. This systemic collapse means Russia is effectively fragmenting within its own vast geography, its organs tearing apart from one another. Imagine a governor in Siberia unable to fly to Moscow for an emergency meeting regarding a crisis or uprising in his region. Imagine critical industrial components unable to cross the Ural Mountains, the Far East, mentally and physically disconnected from Moscow. A federation where a governor cannot reach the capital is doomed to remain on paper. This is the end of Vladimir Putin's famous vertical of power model, which he has been meticulously building for 25 years, where everything is tied to Moscow and one man. Because the laws of physics always trump political propaganda. If you no longer have the technology to overcome gravity, that vertical power cannot stand. It crashes to the ground with a bang, just like that robot that fell face down at the exhibition hall, just like that plane that crashed into the mountain in Tynda. Putin put a huge gamble on the table when he started this war. But he miscalculated two things, two vital factors, badly. First, the nature of the blow coming from outside. Putin measured the war in tanks, missiles, and trenches, but he failed to see that Ukraine's cheap, simple drones, made from parts that could almost be bought at a hobby store, could paralyze Moscow's airspace. Remember the Kover Plan, right? Consider this. The billion-dollar S-400 air defense systems were so preoccupied with protecting the Kremlin and nuclear silos that civilian logistics were choked off. Ukraine managed to shut down Russia's entire civil aviation network without shooting down a single passenger plane just by creating a threat. This is the masterpiece of asymmetric warfare, expensive missiles lost to cheap drones. The second, and far more insidious, far more deadly one was the rot from within. Putin's real blind spot was his arrogant view of technology. For years, they said import substitution. They said, if the West won't give us parts, we'll make them ourselves. They turned this into a state policy, almost a religious belief. But today, that belief is dying in Aeroflot's hangars, with every part that is dismantled. Because patriotic speeches cannot produce high-pressure turbine blades, propaganda cannot write the complex software code that is the brain of an aircraft. And this brings us back to where we started, to the heart of this story, to that agreement. Remember what we said at the beginning of the program? In the early 2000s, Putin offered his people a deal built on the ruins of the chaotic Yeltsin era, an unwritten but universally understood constitution ingrained in the fabric of society. Putin told his people, give me your political freedoms, keep quiet, don't protest, don't bother with elections. In return, I will give you two fundamental things, stability and security. This agreement worked for years. People kept quiet, planes flew, people obeyed, salaries were paid, the window dressing shone. However, as of October 2025, the signature under this contract has been erased. The contract has been unilaterally terminated. Stability, is it stability when giant companies that are the pride of the country, such as S7 and Ural Airlines, are on the verge of bankruptcy, cannibalizing their aircraft to survive? No, this is industrial decay. This is economic gangrene. Security, is it safety when on November 15th, the engine of that Rossiya plane shattered in front of 90 passengers? Is it safety when in July, that 50-year-old junk plane crashed into a mountain in Tynda? Or is it the state seating its citizens at a massive Russian roulette table? I think the most terrifying moment in this process, the moment we could call the breaking point, was when Aeroflot made that announcement. The day they said, we will now repair on our own without certification. And this was not a simple technical announcement. It was a confession. It was the state looking at citizens in the eye and saying, I can't protect you. The rules no longer apply. If you board this plane, your life is your responsibility, not mine. This is not the behavior of a superpower, my friends, a state that cannot bring its own citizens home from a vacation resort, a state that cannot build a safe bridge between its own cities, a structure that condemns its people in the 21st century to 50-year-old Soviet junk or 30-hour train and bus journeys. This is not an empire, it is a rusted cage. And the door to that cage is now locked from the inside, not the outside. The shiny window display that Putin has been presenting to the Russian people for years, that image of modern Russia, is now nothing more than a pile of rubble filled with broken glass. I want to leave you tonight with this thought. It's a slightly uncomfortable thought, but one worth pondering. When an airplane takes off, it defies gravity. Tons of metal gliding through the air is an engineering miracle. But that miracle depends on thousands of invisible parts working in perfect harmony and mutual trust. Just like a state. A state is also an organization that defies gravity, that is, the natural pull of chaos. But when the parts are cannibalized, when trust is left uncertified, and when that vital backbone is broken, Gravity always wins. The laws of physics do not listen to dictators. Russia's sky is closing, and it seems that there is no longer a pilot in the cockpit who can stop this fall and pull the lever. There is only an accelerating downward momentum. So what do you think about this picture? Do you think the Russian people will realize that this contract has been broken and make new demands? Or will they quietly accept this return to the technological Middle Ages, those long train journeys? Could the fact that Putin's most trusted hawks have turned against him bring this war to an end? I can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, how would you feel if you were on that plane? To catch the rest of this story, other fronts of Russia's quiet collapse, and similar in-depth analyses, please remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. But thank you for listening to me tonight and accompanying me on this dark and foggy journey. I'm Nicole. Stay safe. And always, always remember to look beyond the facade that's presented to you. Sometimes there's only rust and silence there. Good night.